To excel at the practicing of Jujutsu is not all that dissimilar to building a good deck in a card game. You need to have proper understanding of optimization. Essentially, you work on cutting down or outright eliminating the seemingly wasteful gestures, words, and even movements involved in your curse technique to try to get the most out of it while putting the least amount of effort into it. This can actually be seen through a couple different curse techniques in the series, one of the most notable being the straw doll technique, as it originates from a cursing method that required not only a specific set of tools or ritual uniform and to be performed during a certain hour of the day, but it has been honed down to its bare essentials. Though with these subtractions also comes imperfections in the technique that may impact the curse energy output. And because of that, there still exists those who consider themselves traditionalists that dedicate their lives to mastering the entirety of their long-lasting traditions and curse techniques. And one key example of this is the musical maestro Miko mage magically multiplying one's mana, Utahime Iori. Utahime Iori is a supporting character throughout the main story of Jujutsu Kaisen, being someone who not only earned the sorcerer rank of semi-grade 1, but also has a close relationship with Satoru Gojo, being his elder in Jujutsu studies while also begrudgingly being one of his closest allies in general. As well, Utahime works as a student supervisor for the Kyoto branch of the Jujutsu Technical Academy, and wishes to use her talents to help guide the next generation to having a proper understanding of curse energy, and I believe they couldn't have found a better teacher for the job. Though, before we discuss that too deeply, let's understand the meaning behind her name and design. Now, design-wise, Utahime is one of the best character designs in Jujutsu Kaisen, as it is extremely simple, but also says a lot. She is a great example of a combination of form and function, as she is often seen in her standard design of wearing a traditional Miko or Shinto Shrine Maiden uniform, with one notable detail about this being her ribbon, which Akutami claims changes size depending on his mood, which is just likely an explanation as to why you can't see it sometimes. Another rather interesting detail about her design is the large scar running nearly across her whole face, which Akutami has claimed doesn't have any sort of special story tied to it, but instead exists to sort of reinforce the danger of her profession as a Jujutsu sorcerer. But what makes her design great has less to do with what exactly she's wearing, and more so the history tied to the outfit, as it speaks a lot for the character, as the uniform she wears is that of a Miko, and that not only ties into her traditional practicing of Jujutsu, as Mikos were tasked with a number of different spiritual duties throughout history, such as either maintaining the shrine that they were raised at, or acting as a medium for the god, and even performing sacred cleansings. In short, the Miko's design represents not only the idea of tradition, but someone who will dedicate a large portion of their life to that tradition. And Utahime combines this theme with the modern world, with her not only wearing this sacred uniform, but also mixing it together with a pair of combat boots. Also, her general design seems to be in part inspired by one of Akutami's previous work called Ninkai Bangai Bara Bajora, and more specifically the female co-lead of Nodoka Hayami, as not only do these two have a similar general design motif, but her dynamics with the other male lead of Noroma, who is a mixture of both Gojo and Itadori's design, is very similar to that of Utahime and Gojo's own relationship in the main series of Jujutsu Kaisen. Though, it's possible that Utahime's design may have also been inspired by the character of Rei Hino from Sailor Moon, as both of them not only have a similar personality, but general looks as well. They also work as shrine maidens in their personal life, and of course, share similar casual outfits. Akutami even being inspired by Sailor Moon wouldn't be too out there either, as not only is it one of the most influential shoujo mangas of all time, but one of the biggest influences on Akutami's work would be that of Yoshihiro Togashi, who not only worked with Sailor Moon's creator, Naoko Takeuchi, but they would eventually end up getting married in 1999. So it's always possible that Akutami read and was influenced by her work over the years, especially since he was not too shy with letting shoujo manga influence his work already. Though, even if we drop back to the origins of just the name Miko, it fits in line with Utahime's character, as the original name was a combination of the characters for female and shaman is one of the many translations for a Jujutsu sorcerer. Though, another common reading of Miko is that of a title for ancient Japanese nobles, be them prince, duke, or even princess, and this ties directly back into Utahime's own name, which, much like other names in the series, matches perfectly with her character, so let's break it down. Let's start first with her family name of Iori, which is pretty straightforward, as it is comprised of the character that directly translates to hermitage or hermit, which in part ties into the Miko lifestyle. And then you have her given name of Utahime, which is comprised of the characters for song or poetry, though in this instance I think it's likely intended to be song, and of course princess, which not only ties into her role as a Miko, as that would make her a hermit princess of song, but Utahime's name together is a direct reference to one of the most popular and successful Japanese musicians, that being Akina Nakamori, or more specifically her first cover album from 1994, Utahime, which would go on to have not one, but 3 direct sequels in the years 2002, 2003, and 2015. And this wouldn't be the only reference to Nakamori in Utahime's character, as the name of her innate curse technique, Soro Soro Kinku, or Solo Forbidden Area, would come directly from another Nakamori single, this being, of course, Kinku, which released as a solo in 1983. Now, the song itself is about falling in love and entering into a forbidden zone of love with someone who is dangerous to be around, which could be seen as a reference to her and Gojo's own relationship, as it's one of the most popular ships amongst fans, but also may have a bit more merit to it than you might first assume. But I'll cover that later into the video. Now let's get into how the technique itself works, as it allows Utahime to create an area around herself that amplifies the natural curse energy output of all targeted sorcerers within it. This can include herself. What this does is allow for even the simplest of sorcerers to perform some of the most impressive of feats, which the potency of her elevation can be increased depending on how Utahime performs the technique, and due to her years of experience, she has mastered every precise movement, word, and of course, the music involved in the performance of her techniques, leaving nothing out. This creates a boost far beyond her normal means, elevating every targeted sorcerer in her area to 120% their natural curse output. Now, this curse technique is seemingly based off of Chikan, or the creation of consecrated ground, which in itself is part of a Miko's practice of Kagura, which is a performance done in 2 phases. Firstly being a slow series of elegant movements accompanied by instrument playing and the waving of cleansing rods meant to attract the gods. This is then followed by a wilder series of movements which is supposed to represent the Miko being possessed by that god themselves, which these elements of Kagura can be seen in Utahime's curse technique, as it not only requires the action, song, and words that represent cleansing an area, but the increase to curse energy output is somewhat represented by the idea of gods gifting those around Utahime with amplified curse energy. Though, you might say that Utahime's curse technique isn't all that useful in combat, as it requires a large time commitment to set up, though this is only likely one side of the technique, and the less potent version would likely emulate the more modern practices of Kagura, which are performed almost predominantly at Buddhist temples as a martial arts demonstration, which also matches up very well with the combination of classic and modern seen in Utahime's design. As well, this means that Utahime likely fights at close range in hand-to-hand style whenever she's not directly buffing her companions. You can even see her stanced up and having pretty decent reflexes during the Goodwill event. As well, it should be mentioned that her energy buffing ability can be stacked with a more natural amplification of a person's own curse technique, allowing them to achieve an even greater percentage of amplification, sometimes even 200%. Now, her curse technique helps make Utahime naturally good at helping bring out the potential of others. Alongside this, her commitment to traditions has been rewarded in such by making her technique stronger. She is, without a shadow of a doubt, a perfect example of someone who should be an instructor. She fits perfectly into the role as an instructor for Kyoto's Jujutsu Academy specifically, as both Kyoto and Tokyo are locations in Japan that at one point was well known as their capital. As well, Kyoto has been seen as a pillar of tradition and history in Japan compared to Tokyo, which has become more of a demonstration of modern advancement, which perfectly matches up with the mindset of each instructor of their branches, as the Kyoto branch of the Jujutsu Academy mainly focuses on teaching the next generation how to adhere to tradition and reject advancement, while the Tokyo branch features a generation of sorcerers who were rejected by those traditions and had to make do on their own. And it is this core difference between the two schools that is likely one of the reasons why Utahime and Gojo have such conflicting personalities. As outside of Gojo being a carefree embodiment of ego itself, he is also someone who stands firmly against the traditions of Jujutsu, as due to the nature of his birth, he can more effortlessly practice with his curse technique and curse energy control than anyone else. While Utahime is a more relatively relaxed person, who takes pride in her adherence to tradition and how it allows for her to create a much more natural curse energy flow than most other sorcerers, which is likely technically impressive to those who understand Jujutsu mastery and most likely contributed to Utahime gaining her position as an instructor, but would be perceived as rather weak to someone like Gojo, hence the teasing. Though this teasing in and of itself is actually seemingly in reference to Major League Baseball of all things, and more specifically the career of Ichiro Suzuki, as Ichiro Suzuki is a veteran of the sport, playing for a handful of teams like the Miami Marlins or the Yankees. But most noticeably, he played for the Seattle Mariners, and Suzuki was a bit of a strange duck, from his awkward stretching he did before he went up to bat, which Gojo himself has actively imitated in the series, but he was also made somewhat famous for an incident that occurred during his time in his Japanese career. As back in 2006, during a celebratory champagne fight, Suzuki would cry out to his teammates to respect their elders before having an entire bottle of champagne dumped over his head. Now, this incident has been referenced not only directly in the series, but is also seemingly the basis for all of Utahime and Gojo's arguments, which works great as both characters have a shared interest in baseball, with Gojo specifically rigging the Goodwill Post event to be baseball, and it's one of the topic of interest he enjoys discussing with people. As well, Utahime loves baseball, with the sport being one of her major hobbies outside of her work as a sorcerer, with Akutami even telling us that her favorite team is the Saitama Cebu Lions. As well, when it comes to baseball, she tends to lose herself in the excitement of the game, with her students comparing her reaction to the sport to being as irrational as her reactions to Gojo, which, as I mentioned prior, somewhat reinforces some sort of connection between the two. And yet, while they are dynamically opposites in practice, and sometimes in personality, the two of them have become very trusted allies, as right when Gojo becomes suspicious of a possible traitor amongst either Jujutsu academies, the first person he makes contact with is Utahime. As well, their confrontational attitude and history together makes for useful cover when working together on a covert mission. A great example of this being when they are using a drinking party as a cover for an organization investigation. Which, talking about drinking, Akutami has also said on multiple occasions Utahime really enjoys her alcohol, listing not only one of her hobbies as drinking, but her favorite food is also alcohol, and more specifically beer, meaning that she likely drinks to get drunk and doesn't really enjoy the flavor. At least that is usually the assumption when it comes to just straight beer. As well, in the fanbook for Jujutsu Kaisen, Utahime is listed as the worst drunk in the series, next to the head of the Zenin clan, Nobito. Ultimately, Utahime isn't all that important of a character in the grand scheme of Jujutsu Kaisen, but she is a great example of a sorcerer who understands the nature of curse energy and wants to properly teach the next generation without bogging them down. And I'm happy that the role that she has played so far has actually allowed her to keep a strong connection with Gojo, and while I don't expect them to do much more with her in the main story, especially after the recent arc, I could definitely see her being an interesting pick for a side story or light novel sometime in the future. As well, Utahime will always continue to be one of my personal favorites, and the additional scenes that we've seen in the anime so far are a treasure. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MeidingOutTheBadGuy. Every little bit helps keep this channel flowing as smoothly as it does. And if you want to elevate your own curse technique, well, you don't need Utahime. What you need is a copy of Shumanetta, A Boring World with a Dirty Jokes doesn't exist at buyshumanetta.com.